Well, Jim, a few more questions before we wrap things up. Our next one, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Rob in Vegas. I was wondering why Hollywood John Tatum never went to the NWA or WWF during his career.
Well, how can I be polite? There's a lot of garage bands that didn't get signed by Epic Records either. John Tatum, to me, and I just saw him, as a matter of fact, at the last Charlotte wrestling reunion that we went to, a couple of years ago now. And I swear to God, I didn't recognize him at first because he doesn't have the long blonde hair anymore. But he was the real life of the party there. He was happy to be there. He wanted to be Michael Hayes. As a matter of fact, when I first met John Tatum was in 1983 in Georgia. He wasn't even working for Ole or for the ragtag band that Jerry Jarrett had sent down for Dundee to book of All of Us. He was working some independents in South Carolina, but he was living at the Falcons Rest with some of the boys. And the first time I ran into him, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I was taking my garbage out to the dumpster after we came in from a town, and he was standing there pissing in the swimming pool. And I went, what the fuck? And he was Franklin Hayes. Because even back then, guys wanted to get into business and be like their hero. And Michael Hayes had been established for about 4 or 5 years at that point, the Freebirds, and he wanted to be Michael Hayes.
Weren't they friends? They
were friends. Well, yeah, they were friends, and he's in Georgia, so it's like that fucking lunatic Ernest T. Bass that wanted to be Buddy Landell's brother in Knoxville. Anyway, so I actually still have a VHS tape somewhere of the goddamn outlaw local cable access South Carolina show that he was working on at that time. But anyway, he and Missy got friendly, and basically he got booked in Mid-South for that run and then Art Imitated Life, and Missy left John Tatum for Eddie Gilbert.
Well, they went to Dallas first.
Well, they went to Dallas and then to Louisiana, but that was really the only run he got. Am I missing something about John Tatum's in-ring or the persona that he projected and the promos he did were sort of more like a whiny crybaby Michael Hayes. I don't know if his work was there. What am I missing? That's pretty much why he didn't go anywhere.
He was pretty good. Him and Jack Victory were a good tag team. Obviously, it was hard to get past the real life and angle of Missy Hyatt leaving him for Eddie Gilbert. I believe he was in a car accident shortly after that, which put him on the sidelines for a period of time. And then he was just one of those guys that for years, the end of World Class, USWA, Global, every
just
independent.
Stayed in Texas.
Just stayed in Dallas. You would see him on all those shows in Dallas. I want to say, I could be wrong. He was with Tessa, right? And then she left him also for Bill Dundee.
Oh, God, I think you may be right.
And then he became like a golfer or something. But he was just one of those guys like Action Jackson that you'd always see on those shows in Dallas for years. And he never really went anywhere. But he was pretty good in his prime, but like at his peak, at John Tatum's peak.
It is.
He was pretty good.
That's a fairly moderate-sized peak, though.
But he certainly was overshadowed by Missy. Like in World Class, She was the star. I mean, she was incredible. Not just in terms of looks. I mean, she was gorgeous, but Missy was one of the best valets in wrestling history.
Oh, she got so much fucking heat. Because she was just the perfect ditzy, blonde, rich girl, cuntish, person who was supposed to be the trophy for the wrestler that he had on his arm, but in actuality was the high maintenance heat magnet of the whole thing and made their lives living hells in storyline. I'm talking about.
I think Missy may be one of the people on the list of most underutilized in wrestling history. She was fantastic as a valet in World Class, had a lot of heat. Same thing in Mid-South. Goes with Eddie to Memphis in 88. She was great there.
Yeah.
And then from that point forward, she was never used that way again.
Well, WCW Tammied her. because the same thing, Tammy Sitch was a tremendous heat-getting personality manager that had more heat than her talent in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, because that was wrestling and she was presented as a wrestling personality, and she got physically attacked. I've told a story about when that fucking 250-pound corn-fed farm woman in Barberville, Kentucky grabbed her by the hair and pulled her all the way across the Knox Central High School gym. Brian Lee, Candido, none of the boys wanted to hit the fucking woman, even though the woman was bigger than they were. But she had heat. But then she goes to the WWF, and now it's entertainment, and they just liked her because she was a pretty girl. And they presented her as a pretty girl and didn't get heat on her. With Missy, that happened years earlier. She shows up in WCW in the TBS administration, and they want to make her an announcer or give her an interview segment or have her on the calendar.
I mean, she was a babyface manager for the Steiner brothers.
Yes, but a babyface with the Steiner, like they needed or wanted a manager. And she got some money out of them for that fucking picture.
Oh yeah, she sued them because there was a wardrobe malfunction, I guess we'll call it, when she was managing the Nasty Boys.
No, there wasn't a wardrobe malfunction. The Steiner brothers, one of the Steiners carried her back.
Oh, I'm thinking of a different picture. Okay.
I thought it was the Steiners carrying her. Was it the Nasties?
The one I'm thinking of that got her to sue them in 1994 for, I think, sexual harassment was one of her breasts was exposed when she managed the Nasty Boys.
Oh, no. There was one where one of the Steiners was carrying her like you carry the damsel in distress back from the ring, but she didn't have any panties on, and they had her folded up like a jackknife, and somebody took a picture that illustrated she didn't have any panties on, and they tacked it up on the wall in the edit suite. At least but nevertheless, as a babyface, as an announcer, no, that was totally wrong. She could have had more heat than I did as a manager if they'd have done it right, but they were looking at entertainment and pretty girls. And, that was the same thing that they did in the WWF with Tammy several years later. They ruined what made them great because they were also attractive.
In 89, so Eddie comes back at the beginning of the year, or the end of the previous year, and eventually he's on the booking committee. Missy becomes the first lady of WCW, or the first lady of the NWA, managing the Steiner brothers, very often just holding their dog. But even as a babyface, she kind of did some cool stuff, like when Muda blew the mist in her face, when they had the Muda-Eddie Gilbert feud that summer. And then, even though she wasn't used to her capabilities as the babyface manager, once Eddie leaves the booking committee, she still manages the Steiners for a time, but that's when they started introducing Nancy as Robin Green and then Woman, and then Missy's just gone for a while. How much heat was there between the Eddie and Missy camp and the Kevin and Nancy camp?
Well, I don't want to speak for anybody personally, but that was not really the fucking crux of the matter. The crux of the matter was the Flair got mad at Eddie and booted him off the booking committee. Missy was not only signed to a contract, but in a spot. But I don't think that Flair was probably a fan of Missy's, probably just because she was with Eddie. Whereas Kevin, who had been on the booking committee before Rick demanded the book, was Rick's trusted lieutenant and really the only, well, I won't say the only guy he could really trust and really get constant feedback from, because I was on it. He could trust me, but Kevin was his right-hand guy, and I was the junior partner in this firm. And Kevin pitches the idea, obviously, for Nancy, and I think it was probably just the way it worked out that Missy was in it because the Steiners had to be in it. Because the whole idea was a fucking going to be a way to entrap Scott Steiner. So
Rick
I'm
Steiner.
sure, or Rick Steiner rather. So I'm sure that Eddie and Missy, neither one were happy about the whole situation, but I don't think that Kevin nor Nancy had anything against. Kevin always spoke well of Eddie. And why would Nancy be mad at Missy? Because she's coming in getting the good spot, and she knows Missy's on the way out because Flair don't like Eddie, and they know that's going to be issues. That's why I'm sorry, but in most cases, when you have a guy and a girl on the roster who are romantic with each other, unless they're the only female, you got problems in all kinds of directions. If they break up, you've got a problem. If there's another female and she's with another guy, then you've got all kinds of problems. I always preferred for the boys to fuck the rats and leave the girls in the business alone. Now it's completely reversed the opposite way. They don't touch the rats because there are none. Fuck around with all the girls on the roster and have ill feelings all around inside the locker room. I don't get it. But anyway, there may have been some heat with Missy and Eddie. There probably wasn't any heat with Kevin and Nancy.
And I'll say this too. Paul Heyman had a reputation in the 90s among some as a booking genius. The fact that he didn't find anything better to do with Missy when she went to ECW has always astounded me because she was so talented. Again, one of the most underutilized talents in the history of wrestling, Missy Hyatt. But Jim,
what did she do? What did she do in WCW or in ECW? I can't even remember.
I think she debuted at ringside. She was just sitting in a front row seat making out with Stevie Richards. And then they put her with the Sandman, replacing Nancy, who had been with the Sandman. And that was it. Like, very few promos on TV. If anything, would just be in the montage of things at the end of the show. But she was the walking riot, Missy Hyatt. There's so much that could have been done with her.
I'm wondering if Missy was even into it at that point, or if she even gave a shit.
I don't know, but, Jim, I think Missy probably would have gotten even more money out of Ted Turner and WCW when she sued them if she had the right lawyer on her side.
Good representation is what you're saying, young man. You need good representation in order to maximize your ability to be compensated when you've been damaged in some way, whether your career's been damaged or your personality has been damaged or you've been slandered or you've been harmed by greedy people, major corporations, rotten, underhanded wrestling bookers. Only one man can take you to the promised land of the pay window in the United States court system. Only one man fights for the little guys and triumphs for them on a regular basis. Only one man.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Those are the rest.
Folks, you know the phone number, 888-692-8084. You know the email address, newlawoffice.com. You know the man himself who was just on The Experience this past week telling us how he's helping not only citizens in West Virginia, but folks across the country and people in the wrestling industry that have been put upon by a serial suer. I knew some way I would be able to compare him to a sewer one of these days. Anyway, the man we're talking about is Stephen P. New. The sewer we were talking about is Dick Boy. And Stephen P. New is helping people on both sides of the wrestling industry, the fans in the seats and the folks in the ring, and he can help you too. Brian, how many cases now have we been talking about? The cancer from Roundup, the cancer from talcum powder, the abused senior citizens in the nursing home, and now the incredible case he's got where 55 veterans of service here in the United States were assaulted in an indecent manner by one of the doctors at the Veterans Administration. Stephen P. New is chasing these people down, making them squeal, turning them upside down and shaking them for change, and he could do the same thing for you with your legal entanglements. We cannot recommend anyone more highly than the Baron of the Barristers, the consigliere of the cult of Cornette himself, Stephen P. New.